Hello, Neale. Thank you so much for inviting us to your home here in Ashland, Oregon.
Well, you're very welcome. It's good to have you here.
Thank you. So you're known, obviously, as the man who wrote the Conversations with God books, and I'd like to talk about that, and also you, the man behind the books. So tell us a little bit about yourself. I know that 25 years or so ago, you were not as happy a man as you are today. How would you describe yourself, say, 25 years ago?
Well, I'm happy to talk about this with you, but I need to tell you at the outset, as a preamble perhaps, that it's totally unimportant and irrelevant. I'm just a person. I'm a regular human being. What is important is what has happened here, that an extraordinary message has come through, an extraordinary piece of data, some new information, or perhaps old information in a new way has been given to humanity. And that's what we must pay attention to always, because there are two pieces of data inside of the larger container that are vitally important for all of us to know and to understand. The first is that all of us are having conversations with God all the time, that it isn't about one person or one individual. That's why I'm not too terribly excited about talking about myself, because really I'm just one of 6 billion people who are having conversations with God. And the second piece of data, if I might, and then we can go to your agenda, is that we don't really understand who and what God is. Therefore, we don't really understand who and what we are. Therefore, our entire process of interacting with each other on this planet is misplaced in terms of its effectiveness. We are not interacting with each other in any way that makes any sense at all, as we can all see by looking at what we're doing. So if God had one message that he is bringing to the world, it would be, you've got me all wrong.
Sure.
Now, having said that, I can talk a bit about me, although I'm terribly uninteresting. I'm just a person, and a few years ago, I was having great difficulty in my life. Nothing was going well. My health was falling apart. My life was going downhill in other ways. My relationship with my significant other at the time was also crumbling, and my career had reached a dead end as well. So I felt that something was desperately out of place. I was very angry. I was confused. I had done all the things that I had been told one must do to make life work. I had obeyed most of those rules, not broken a great many. And yet, here I was. And so I became very angry. And one night I awoke in a period of enormous frustration and depression, really. I think I was threatening to fall into chronic depression at that time in my life. I had gone through many weeks of feeling just horrible about my life and what was going on. And then one night I woke up in that mood, and I came out into the larger part of a darkened house, and I began to cry out inside of my mind, because the house was filled with people, and it was 4:20 in the morning. And but I cried out inside of my head, what does it take to make life work? What have I done to deserve a life of such continuing struggle? And somebody tell me the rules. I'll be happy to play. Just give me the rule book.
And then that pleading for answers, the answers began to come.
Yeah, I found a yellow legal pad on the coffee table in front of me. And so I flicked on a lamp, and I picked up the yellow legal pad, and I began to write a very angry letter to God. And it was at that point that I had my first experience of that presence in my life in a very real and physical way that made it impossible for me to ignore any further. What I've since understood is that God is present in all of our lives all the time. But unless God makes her presence known in a way that's irrefutable and cannot be denied, we tend to ignore him and pretend that he's not there, or not pay attention to what she has to say.
Did that stimulate any fear in you?
Oh, yes, of course it did. Because the first manifestation of God in any physical way in my life was an actual voice over my right shoulder. I heard that voice as clearly as I'm hearing yours. And it was very frightening, because I turned around, there was no one there.
Sure. So did you think you were going nuts?
I thought exactly that. I thought, oh my God, I'm going daft as well as everything else. My life is falling apart, and now I've lost my mind.
Now you're hearing things.
So, but at the same time, immediately after that initial thought, I began to feel becalmed. I was overcome, in fact, with a sense of peace and joy. I hate to be so trite about it, but in fact that's exactly what it felt like.
So you went from fear to joy and peace
Almost
within
instantly.
seconds.
Almost instantly.
Because that's what I was interested in, is your, if you like, your personal transformation, because I totally love everything you've written, and what that means is that each of us are called to transform, and I was just curious about your own personal journey of transformation.
Well, my journey took around 4.5 seconds, in a sense, because it's been a long road since then to really absorb deeply and to place into my own life, and I still haven't done that completely, not nearly completely, but to begin to place into my own life the messages and the lessons that have come through in the conversations with God dialogue. But the initial movement over that chasm that existed in my life, that took around 4 seconds.
Really? So that was a truly life-changing moment for
Well,
you.
it was exactly that, of
And
course.
was it grace? Would you describe that as grace?
That's a good word for it. It's a more traditional religious word, but I think it's an appropriate word. I think I was touched by a moment of grace.
And transformed in that moment, and that transformation continues.
Transformed in the sense that I stepped away from my previous thoughts about myself vis-a-vis life. That is, I dropped all of my anger, all of my resentment, all of my frustration. Those three things dropped away almost immediately.
Wow.
And I have not been revisited by those experiences very often in the intervening years. Once in a while, of course, we all have those experiences, but not very often anymore do I become overtly angry or deeply frustrated or confused or have those experiences of resentment that I had in those days. So I've stepped away from those emotions almost instantaneously, and almost, I would say, in largest part, for the remainder of my life. But I think that, when God enters your life in a way that is so indisputable, it would be, I think, strange for anything less than a total miracle to take place.
That would be to deny God, to deny the miracle would be to deny God, presumably.
Yeah.
So immediately you started writing from that point onwards.
Well,
And that's a dialogue that's
that
continuing.
night, that very moment, I began to be filled with answers to the questions that I had asked and to many other questions I never even knew existed. And so I began writing on the yellow legal pad that I had picked up to jot down my angry letter to God.
Sure. And what date was that? Do you remember the date?
No, it was in late February of 1991. I'm not sure the exact day, because I didn't have any reason to pay attention to it at the time. It was in the third or fourth week of February of that year.
And did you know what was going to happen with what you were receiving and what you were writing down?
No, of
Did you have
course
any
not.
sense?
No. I simply wrote all that evening. I mean, that it was 4 o'clock in the morning, and I stopped writing around 8:15 when I realized, much to my astonishment, that it was 8:15 in the morning. The house was coming alive, and I thought, oh my gosh, has that much time passed? I really thought I'd been there about an hour and a half, and not 3 or 4 hours. And interestingly enough, my hand was never tired. And now, when I write it, just a letter to someone, if I handwrite a letter, who handwrites letters anymore anyway? But in the old days when we used to handwrite letters, I can recall that by the third page, I was a bit weary of the process. I was writing there on that yellow legal pad for 3 or 3.5 hours, and never felt a sense of my hand tiring out or of that much time having passed. But it did become around 8:15 in the morning, and so I set aside my writing tablet and my pen, and I hid it actually beneath the coffee table on the lower ledge, because I didn't want anyone to see what I'd been doing, because they would have said, what is this? You must be going daft. So I let everything just lie there. But the next night, I was awakened again at about the same time, around 4:20 in the morning. This time I was awakened out of a sound sleep, and I woke up with a deep sense of needing to get back to that process, as you would say. And so there I went back out to the couch, found the yellow legal pad, and picked up the pen and began writing again. And the connection or the integration was seamless. As I look back on it now, I cannot recall. I cannot see
Which day?
where one part of the dialogue ended and the next part of the dialogue began. It's absolutely seamless. That
So
went
it's like
on.
you were being given dictation and you were just
It was
taking
exactly
it in
like
chunks.
that. It was precisely like that, as if I was being given dictation. And what I was being given, the information that was being received, if I could put it that way, by me, brought up other questions, as you could well imagine. I would be writing this stuff and thinking, well, that can't be, or what about this? Or my mind is arguing, debating, or at least reasoning, trying to reason with what I was seeing here. And as I would think of those questions, I would say, well, how about that? Or how can that be true? Even before I could write the full question, the next answer to that question would be already filling my mind, so that I had to write faster and faster and faster and faster in order to get everything down. Until I finally actually did say, in frustration at one point, I recall saying, slow down. I actually said that. And in fact, the information began to come more slowly. So it was an interesting experience. This went on for about, golly, I'm going to say 2 or 3 weeks, every night, at the same hour of the morning, around 4:15 to 4:20 in the morning. And then, that is, I was awakened each night without a clock, without any kind of an alarm, at roughly the same time, and had this experience. And then that tapered off until it was happening about every 3 nights, or 3 or 4 nights a week, and then 2 nights a week, and then less and less. But I began to accumulate a large number of tablets filled with handwritten notes of this dialogue that eventually became the first book. It said in the dialogue, by the way, this will one day become a book. And I didn't believe that. But that's the last thing I've chosen not to believe.
And I'm curious, when you were receiving that, did you ever have a feeling of, I suppose I'd call it destiny, which is, did at any point in your life previous to that, you think that this might be where your life went? Or was it like a quantum different experience of your life?
What is your name?
Nick.
Nick, I've had a feeling of destiny all my life, since I was 5 years old, 6 years old. You could have asked me the question you just asked me now any time since the time I was 6 or 7, and I would have said, I absolutely have a feeling of destiny. That's what added to my frustration at this point in my life when I had no job. My career had reached a dead end, as I said. My relationship was rapidly crumbling right in front of my face. My health was going downhill. All these things were happening at the same time. You know, in most people's lives, it's usually at least one or the other. You know,
you had the full set.
The relationship is going well, but the career is hitting a dead end, or the career is falling apart, but the relationship's not doing that badly, or your health. But no, with me, it was all three at one time, and so I couldn't understand that because my frustration was deep and rich. In that, I had felt since I was 7, some sort of destiny. Some inner sense that there was something very huge and very large for me to do on this planet.
Do you think most people have that when they're children?
I can't answer that question. I don't know. I've not talked to enough people about it, actually. I don't know whether it was just a normal childhood dream of, grandeur, of being the hero in the piece, or whether it was peculiar to me. I don't know. But I do know that I felt that sense, and a growing sense of that, incidentally, as I matured. In my late teens and in my early 20s and 30s, it's just this gnawing sense inside of me that there's something I'm supposed to be up to here, something I'm supposed to be doing. I have no idea what it is. And again, that sense of frustration of, why give me that feeling and then not make it clear to me what's up, what's the agenda. As I said, somebody give me the rule book, I'll play, just give me the book.
I have a friend who said she always knew she should be about her father's business, but she never quite knew what the business was.
Yes, well, I feel exactly the same way. I would describe my experience exactly that way. I will say this much. When I was around 11 or 12 or 13, somewhere in that early pre-pubescent period, I felt for certain that I would become a priest. I was born and raised in the Roman Catholic faith, and I was absolutely clear that I was going to go into the priesthood. If nothing else, I knew that. And I kind of thought I would wind up being a bishop or a cardinal, or who knows, maybe even the Pope, who knows, the first American Pope. But somehow or another, I felt as a young boy that my destiny was to be in the clergy and to be a priest. When I discovered that, unlike the Anglican Church, Catholic priests are not allowed to marry or to engage in any sexual experience whatsoever, I quickly disabused myself of the notion that I would become a priest, because the female gender was far more attractive to me at that time than communion with God. So, and of course, they're all the same now, I understand. It's the same experience. But, so I, in fact, for that very reason, I'm not being facetious, I'm being serious. I discovered girls and put God on hold. Now, if I had been born and raised perhaps in Britain, I might have double-tracked it. It had my romances and my religious experience at the same time, but I was in the Catholic faith, and that didn't seem to be an option to me at the moment, nor did, by the way, at that moment, leaving the Catholic Church seem to be an option. So I thought, okay, I'll be a Catholic who's married and has children. Only later did I discover that I could have become an Anglican priest and done quite well.
Great. And I think you're at pains to point out that you don't feel in any way special in what you've been called to do.
I'm
in
not
your
at all
destiny,
special,
that
no.
all of us have that.
Absolutely, every
That
one of
calling.
us. Every one of us. That's the whole point of the conversation.
Do you think some people get caught up in this idea of specialness and spirituality? That some
Well, I think we
people are
should.
called
I think
and
we should
special?
hold ourselves as special. We are special, and I think that it's a great shame that so many of us have been told to be seen and not heard, and not to allow ourselves to feel special, for fear that we will somehow make someone else feel less. What we have to do is teach our children how to hold their own specialness in such a brilliant way, without doing it in a field of comparison that causes them to feel that someone else is not special. So I do feel that I'm special. Nick, I'm very special. I have talents that are unique. I have an incredible mental ability. And as you can see, I'm enormously handsome. So I have all, and I have a wicked sense of humor too. But I don't notice that any of those qualities somehow exceed similar qualities or different kinds of gifts that are given to every one of us. So there's a very delicate place that one finds, that place of balancing one's own appreciation of self without somehow placing it into the context of comparing it to someone else. I believe that we're all extraordinarily, I hate to be trite here, but I really do believe that we are all extraordinarily special.
So I think in the Course in Miracles it talks about the difference between grandeur and grandiosity, and that grandeur is of our spirit and grandiosity is of our ego.
I can't do any better than that.
And that's the kind of thin line, isn't it?
It's a wonderful description, and that says it all, really.
So really, your work is about helping you find your own grandeur and helping other people find their own grandeur.
My work now is about giving people back to themselves. My mission in life, my self-appointed mission, is to give people back to themselves, that they might know who they really are, that all of us might ultimately experience and express who we really are, thus to recreate ourselves anew in the next grandest version of the greatest vision we ever held about that, so to change the world and to alter and affect the world entire. Something has to be done, Nick, because we are in desperate trouble on this planet.
Why do you think we're so afraid, or why are many people so afraid to embrace their own divinity? For some people it almost feels like heresy to say that I'm a child of God, doesn't it? And yet we are.
Or much less to say I am God.
Yeah.
Forget about being a child of God. What if you say I am God? I am God incarnate.
So
now you're really in trouble. They used to string people up for saying that, as I remember.
And I think, isn't that a deep fear that many people have in their psyche, is that if they do claim that about themselves, they're going to be crucified or something like that?
Well, there are two reasons that people will not claim their divinity. The first of which is that in some cases, people's idea of what it is to be divine is not very attractive. That is, we've painted God as some sort of a being in the sky who is vindictive, violent, angry, retributive, terribly judgmental beyond all reason, intolerant to the largest degree. And that's not a God that people want to be like. No. Those who hold God in a different way hold God to be so utterly magnificent, so totally glorious, that for us to even compare ourselves to that feels somehow inappropriate, especially when our parents and all of the elders around us have told us so, that it's not appropriate to think of yourself in those ways.
So how do we break through that conditioning?
God said to me in our conversation, if you saw you as God sees you, you would smile a lot.
Do you think there's any judgment in God? Do you think there's any?
No, there would be no judgment in God, because for God to have a judgment, God would have to have a preference. And God has no preference whatsoever with regard to anything at all, because for God to have a preference would mean that something other than what God preferred or chose could occur. Now, supposing, for instance, that you're a very powerful, let's just create a story here, you're a very powerful king in a kingdom where no one can defy you. Not even the masses of people could rise up against you. That is, everything that you could possibly ask for, you would have instantly or off with their heads. And so if that were the case, everything that you intend would be there before you. After a while of that, you would suddenly begin to lose your ability to even have a preference, because you can only prefer one thing over the other when the possibility of the other exists. But if no possibility exists except that which you intend, preference suddenly becomes impossible. So for God to have a preference, something other than what God intends would have to be possible. And that, of course, is impossible by definition.
So on one level, it's the world
Did
as
you
it
follow
should
that?
be.
That's a theological line of reasoning that's rather new to religious constructions in this part of the century.
So from that perspective, though, could you say that the world is just as it should be, even with all that we judge to be wrong
It
about
is precisely as it should be. The only question is not whether it should be what it is.
It is what it
is what it is, and it should be that. But the only question is that what we intend for the morrow?
Yeah.
Do we choose that again and again and again? That's the only question.
Or
Do we choose to create something other than what it now is? It is exactly as it should be, to bring us to exactly the right and perfect place, to allow us to make the exact and right perfect decision with regard to who we choose to experience ourselves as being on the morrow.
Because isn't one of the challenges is for those of us that say we want to change the world, but not actually to change it out of judgment, but to change it out of choice and inspiration?
Someone once said, rather pithily I thought, judge not and neither condemn.
Yeah. But isn't that the problem in some respects of the people that want to
be judged?
Yeah. But isn't that the problem in a way that most people are wanting to change the world out of a judgment?
Of course,
the way
it's the
things
problem.
they are.
It's exactly the problem.
So how do we shift from judgment to acceptance to transformation?
By noticing that judgment doesn't work, and it never has. By simply looking at what works and what does not work. By deciding at last to in fact do what works and stop doing what does not work. The same way we make any other decision.
But most of the world thinks
we
it's
don't
still
try
working
to eat,
to judge, doesn't it?
we don't. I notice that I don't eat my soup with a fork because it doesn't work. No one has to tell me that twice. I may have tried it when I was 5 or 6, but I realized I'm not getting a whole lot of soup here on the fork. So I eat my soup with a spoon for the simple reason that the fork doesn't work. And no one has to make those adjustments for me over and over again. They demonstrate to me at one point, this does not work and this does. So it works to use a spoon with which to consume one's soup. All we have to do is apply the same simple logic to the outcomes that we see being produced in everyday life. Does violence, for instance, as one example, work? Is it functional as a means of changing the economic or political constructions on our planet? In the short term, sometimes it has. In the long term, it never does.
How can we be part of the hope of humanity, which is one of your expressions? How can we be the hope of humanity to educate and to be part of that change of thinking?
Well, we're doing it right now, right in this very moment. The question rather, is rhetorical because we're doing it right in this moment.
So it's just to do it.
Well, we're becoming part of that process of re-educating humanity by virtue of this very interview that we're conducting right now. And of course, in the larger sense, by your life lived, by simply moving through your life in such a way that the clarity of the vision and the reasonableness of the position and the accuracy of the message is self-evident.
In Tomorrow's God, your last book, you talked about one of the greatest challenges that we're facing is to reimagine what God is, and the idea that every religion has a piece of God or an insight into God, but not the whole of God. That to me seems such an exciting idea. Can you expand on that?
Well, as I said at the outset of our time together, Nick, if God could give one message to the world, if God was restricted but for some reason to say only one thing to the planet. I was asked this, by the way, on television, on American television, which does not nearly have the quality of British television, I might add, but nevertheless, there was one interesting question that was asked of me. Only with 30 seconds left, however, because they always do that. Tom Brokaw, it wasn't Tom Brokaw, it was Matt Lauer on the Today Show on NBC. He said, Neale, we have only 30 seconds left. Let me ask you a question. If God had only one message to give to the world and was limited to one paragraph, what would it be? You got 30 seconds. And I said, well, I can limit it to much less than one paragraph. It'd be one sentence. And I've already given it to you, Nick. The sentence is, you've got me all wrong. Now, if that's true, if it's not true, of course, the discussion ends right there. We've got God all right, and it's all there in this book, or that book, or that book, or that book, or whatever book happens to be the book of your choice. On the other hand, if we're willing to entertain the possibility, and I mean just the possibility, for the sake of discussion, that we may have something wrong here, it suddenly opens the discussion to a brand new opportunity for exploration. It brings us what Sir John Templeton calls humility theology. I asked Sir John a few years ago, what is the greatest need on the planet today? And he said, humility theology. I said, what is that? He said, it's a theology that acknowledges that we don't have all the answers. So all we have to do is admit to the possibility that there may be something we don't fully understand here about God and about life, the understanding of which would change everything. If we can be humble enough to acknowledge that, rather than stand in our arrogance and say, no, Neale, you don't understand. Everything we need to know on this subject is right here. If we can get off of that position, we can save the world. If we can't, we're doomed. It's only a matter of time. And I say those things advisedly, by the way, not to scare people. We simply can't keep walking into this wall much further without hitting the wall.
And waking up.
We're getting very close to hitting that wall right now.
You talk about yourself willingly being a saviour.
No, not me being a savior.
Yeah, but also that everybody is a saviour.
Yeah, I don't know that I've even used those words, but go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, and I read that, and I thought that's
Yes?
what you said. That
Well,
you were willing to say
if
you
I
were a
wrote it,
saviour.
then I said it. I think that I am a savior in the sense that all of us have been sent here to save ourselves from ourselves. That's what we're up to here. You know, I saw a wonderful bumper sticker. I think it was actually in the UK, as I recall. I saw a wonderful bumper sticker a couple of years ago that said, "God, save me from your people." And I thought it was very pithy and right on point, actually.
Yeah.
So I think we have to save ourselves from ourselves. See, life, Nick, is a process by which life informs life about life through the process of life itself. That's what's happening here. And God is this extraordinary aspect of that whole process that recreates God anew in the next grandest version of itself in every golden moment of now. And what we're doing here is participating as part of that process. Once we understand that all options are on the table, truly, without wanting to be overly saccharine, glory awaits, or disaster. We stand at the precipice, that wonderful, what is the Chinese character for opportunity is the same as disaster? Do you remember that one?
Yeah, crisis and opportunity.
Crisis and opportunity are represented by the same character in Chinese writing.
So we're at that threshold.
Yeah, exactly at that threshold.
And
It's as Apollinaire said, though, and I've quoted him in the book, come to the edge. We can't, we'll fall. Come to the edge. We can't, we're afraid. Come to the edge. And they came. And he pushed them. And they flew.
why are we afraid to fly?
Because we don't know that we can. We've been told that we cannot.
So do you see that's part of your role, is just helping people remember that they can fly too?
Yes, exactly. To give people back to themselves, that we might know once again who we really are and reclaim our rightful place in an extraordinary universe.
And are you very conscious not to have people put you in the kind of guru box, because presumably you don't want to be in that box?
They couldn't keep me there for 5 minutes anyway, because if they met me and were in the same room with me for 5 minutes, they would understand this is not a guru. So my behavior would give me away if nothing else did. And I think the age of gurus in any event is over. Each of us is a messenger. Every single human being is a messenger, bringing a message to life, about life, through the process of life itself. We are telling ourselves about ourselves and picking up our cues about who we can be, who we might be, and who we are now from each other. Therefore, our daily behaviors become our pattern for tomorrow, and very few people understand that.
I'm curious if it causes you any pain if people try and do that to you, or are you okay with people trying to put you up or knock you down? Just personally, are you okay with that?
It doesn't affect me either way, and to a large degree. I stop them immediately if they try to put me up, because I tell them that that's not who I am. If they try to knock me down, I just ignore it completely. It doesn't matter to me. I'm totally unaffected by that stuff. Isn't that interesting?
Was that since that threshold moment, or is that something you've developed over time?
No, I think since that threshold moment, I've read some of the most scathing reviews and some of the most god-awful things written about me in the media and said about me on television. And it doesn't bother me. In fact, people have a right to their opinion. Maybe somebody thinks that I am daft. Maybe they think that I am Satan incarnate, or doing, at the very least, the work of the devil. I mean, people have a right to their point of view. They have a right to that. And I would never deprive them of that.
And do you see yourself as courageous, or do you see yourself as a man just living his life?
No, I don't see any courage involved. There's no courage involved here. I don't even have a sense of courage about it.
Really? Because you don't feel fear about what you do at all?
No, I want to be afraid. The worst that can happen is I would die. somebody would kill me, and that's not the worst that could happen to anyone. I mean, I don't have any fear of death, really. No, I don't have any sense of fear. I just don't. Maybe fools rush in where angels fear to tread after all. I don't know, but I don't have any sense of fear or courage connected with any of this. It's just, but if you ask me, do I have a sense of mission, I would jump all over that, absolutely.
Yeah, no, I see
I
you as
think
a
that
man on a mission.
I think that people who do have a sense of mission somehow are immunized.
Yeah.
It's a doctor who comes along and says, okay, if you accept this mission, zip, we'll immunize you and make you fearless. Because I think people who are deeply imbued with a mission don't think in terms of courage or fear. It doesn't enter their mind. I mean, if you had asked Martin Luther King, are you afraid? Doesn't it take courage to do what you were doing? I think he would have said, I don't understand.
That's
Why
interesting.
yeah.
Because I've read something from Nelson Mandela that said he often did feel afraid.
Yes.
And so courage for him was not about not feeling fear, but about feeling the fear and going beyond it.
Well, God bless him. I don't. Maybe I'm just blind to it. I don't see myself in any kind of precarious position, and therefore courage isn't part of the process.
It's a wonderful place to be. So do you feel yourself joyful and happy a lot of the time and peaceful?
Most of the time. Most of the time. When I don't get caught up in the little itty-bitty dramas of everyday life. I'm talking about the really itty-bitty dramas, the flat tire.
So those things can still
Yeah,
wind
I
you
was
up.
like, what's this? What's this? But the big stuff, I'm like a lot of people really. The bigger the issue, the bigger the crisis, the more calm I become. I think that's really common, frankly, among people. Churchill was a wonderful example of that. He would, stand stoic and totally immovable and unshakable in the face of a whole country being attacked. But if he misplaced his cigar, all hell broke loose in the house. I think he's rather common, actually.
So going back to your mission and how we can reimagine God, how can we bring forward, all of us in the world, that process of reimagining God and our place in the universe? There's one or two practical things people watching this, other than reading your books, what can they do on a daily basis to?
I think that they could reimagine God by allowing themselves to use their own lives to demonstrate what they would like God to be. That would be an extraordinarily wonderful way to reimagine God, it seems to me. To just say, well, if I could, kind of like, let me show you. This is what I think God would be. Since I'm about the business of reimagining God, anyway, watch me, I'll show you.
So just be it.
Watch how I talk, watch how I act, watch what I do, watch how I think, watch how I am. And maybe by that means I can get across more vividly than any other way I could think of what I imagine God to be. It's a tall order if we think that God is this totally perfect, inhuman, having nothing to do with us kind of being. But supposing God were, what's that wonderful song that was written a few years ago? Supposing that God were one of us, on the bus, just like one of us, waiting to get back home. Supposing that God were the guy in the park, the wino, leaning up against a tree with his bottle. Supposing that God were the beggar on the street or the busman. Supposing that God were the person right across the dinner table from you. Supposing that God were the human being in the mirror. Wouldn't that be interesting?
So, is there anybody you don't have compassion for?
No.
So you can look at anybody and have compassion for them?
Yeah. Absolutely. I can't imagine a person that I wouldn't have compassion for. Why would you not have compassion for anybody? Even the worst among us. That would be compassionate enough because they're the worst among us. You'd be compassionate for that reason.
So the worst amongst us are teachers of compassion?
The worst amongst us are our perhaps greatest teachers.
So it comes from that fundamental belief that we are all God in various disguises. And it's to see beyond the disguises.
Yeah. I'm sorry I can't take off on that line, but that's correct. That's where it comes from.
So that's the starting point and the finishing point, really. There's nothing in between.
It's the only point. There's nothing else. There's nothing else.
No exceptions.
This is not an idea that came out of conversations with God. The Sufis, thousands of years ago, changed the Muslim saying. The original Islamic saying was, there is no God but God, meaning there is only one God, Allah. Allah, by the way, literally means the God. Allah, the God. And so the original Muslim teaching from the Quran is there is no God but God. There is only one God, in other words. Monotheistic religion. The Sufi take on that, the Sufi tradition, changed there is no God but God to something quite poetic. There is nothing but God. Not there is no God but God. There is nothing but God. That's all there is.
That's all there is.
What an insightful idea given to us thousands of years ago. And so we come to the conclusion that there are no new truths, only a new willingness to accept the truth that has always been there, always will be there.
It strikes me that another powerful message from the books and from your conversations is the old belief about if you're spiritual, you somehow have to be poor or virtuous and all that stuff. And I think that's, in my experience, that's such a big one for many people to overcome, is the belief that God really wants us to prosper and not to suffer and not to be poor. I know you wrote a separate book on that about abundance and right livelihood, I think, didn't you?
Yes.
And I found that a fascinating conversation. Would you just share a few insights about how we move from a belief that God wants us to suffer or have lack and scarcity to God wanting us to really prosper on every level, you know, the spiritual, emotional, as well as a physical and financial level?
The only way that humanity has been able to justify its willingness to cause other people to suffer is to make it virtuous to be suffering. And so in the early days of the churches, first the Catholic Church and then in fact the Church of England and other churches, in the early days of those churches they made it a virtue to suffer in order to justify the actions of the leadership within those churches which caused people to suffer. And they had to give all their alms and give all their money to the church and then live on next to nothing and depend on the largesse of the church in order to survive. So suffering had to be made into a virtue. Otherwise, monolithic churches where power resided in the hands of one or a very few number of people could not have existed for very long because those churches would be overthrown. So it became a point of standard theology to indicate that God wants you to suffer, or at the very least rewards those who suffer in silence.
Yeah. So it buys you something.
God rewards no such thing. No. God is the seat and the source of all glory and all happiness and all joy. And if we are made in the image and likeness of God, which, by the way, all those religions teach that we are, then why in the world would God tell us that suffering is a virtue? No, to not suffer, to suffer not, to stand up and say, no, all the goodness, all the wonder, all the glory, all the richness, all the joy in the world is mine by inheritance. I am royalty in this kingdom. To strike that pose, to take that stance, to embrace that idea, is, I think, what God intends for all of us.
So many of us have problems receiving, don't we? That we somehow think it's holier to give than to receive, and then we have to make those self-sacrifices. So do you think that one of the challenges and the opportunities for us is to become better receivers of the blessings of God?
Let me talk about holier to give than to receive. I think it's more powerful to give than to receive. I think it's more beneficial to give than to receive. I think the admonition, the injunction, do unto others as you would have it done unto you, is very powerful, but for an entirely different reason than traditional religion would have us believe or would have us understand. The reason that I think it's very powerful to give rather than to receive is that if I wait in my life to receive things, I put myself in the position of one who is at the mercy of others. And the quality of my life begins to be judged by the nature of what it is and how much of it is that I receive. On the other hand, if I put myself in the position of being the source of all the goodness in my life, then that which flows through me sticks to me. Everything that I give to another ultimately comes back to me. What goes around comes around. And a huge truth is invoked in the moment that I give to you what I would choose to have for myself. The truth that is invoked is the fact that we are all one. That what I give to you, I give to me because there's nobody else in the room. There's only us here, and we are the same. So what I've learned in my life is that as I give to the world gives back to me. Everyone in the world, by the way, has discovered that sooner or later. It's not new news. Not because it's the virtuous thing to do, because that's how the process works. That's how the world works. In the end, when all is said and done, you cannot receive anything from the world that you have not put into the world, because you are the only source of the experience you're having. There is no other source.
In my experience, though, there are some people who are very good givers, but they're not good receivers. You know, when people try to give back to them, they don't allow themselves to receive through unworthiness. And I know that's an illusion of unworthiness, but it's a belief in unworthiness that somehow they don't deserve or they shouldn't have the good things of life. And that ultimately, as you say, that's a belief that they're going to get rewarded for that sacrifice in heaven or wherever. But how can people realise that it's not a bad thing to receive, it's actually a blessing to receive?
By realizing that when they allow themselves to receive the gift of another, they are in fact giving the biggest gift of all that they could ever give. And that by refusing to receive the gifts from another, they deny that other the opportunity to show up in their most magnificent way. One of the most extraordinary things that was ever said to me was when I, in a moment of self-effacement, said to a person who wanted to give me something really quite nice, no, I really couldn't. I couldn't accept. I mean, I don't really deserve that. You know. And that person looked at me and said, "You would deny me the joy of giving you this? Out of your sense of modesty? I waited all day to give you this. I was so excited to bring this here for you. You would deny me the joy of giving you this? Because you don't think you're worthy of it? What are you saying about me? I thought you were worthy of it. What are you saying about my judgment?" Let me tell you a story. Something very similar happened to me when I was with a woman in my life. She was an astonishingly beautiful person. And we were partnered in a relationship and having that delicious time of really getting to know and love each other. And one evening, we were preparing to go out, and she was dressed to kill. And I had my tuxedo on. It was a very formal affair. And she had an evening gown on, and she had very, very long hair and beautiful drop earrings. And she was standing in front of the vanity, as I recall, doing an extraordinarily feminine thing. That's something that only women do. She was letting her hair drop, because she had very long hair, tilting her head and just doing this delicious thing where she was inserting the earring, and letting the hair drop away. And I just caught that strikingly feminine thing to do. And I looked at her and I just said, "My God, you're beautiful. What are you doing with me? How did I ever deserve this?" And she looked at me, and she took the earring. She just looked at me in the mirror. She took the earring out of her ear, threw it down, took the other one out, threw it down, took off her bracelets, threw them down. She began to dismantle herself. I said, what happened? What happened? Women, you just can't understand women. You know, what happened? She said, "Is that what you think of me? Is that what you think of me? That my taste is so bad that why would I even be with you? When you gather a different idea about yourself and you can understand why I would fall in love with you, that's when I'll talk to you again. Otherwise, don't call me." I never, ever forgot that moment. It lives in my memory as if it happened yesterday, as you can see. So, how I would help another person to begin to receive the gift that the world wishes to give them would be to say to them, would you deny, even if you deny yourself, would you deny the world the joy of giving this to you? How arrogant is that?
You can understand how people feel unworthy if you felt
But
that unworthiness.
when you turn it around and allow them to see that they're giving a gift to another by allowing that other to give the gift to them, suddenly it falls inside of a container that they can hold. Oh, never thought about it that way. That's what I would do. I had to think about that for a minute, but that's what I would do. That's what I would tell a person who was in that space. I, fortunately, am not in that space. You may give me whatever you want to give me.
But you weren't always in that space.
I think I was. I've in my earlier years, I had some interesting personality conditions, some personality traits, if you please. But inability to receive things was not one of them.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I was always somehow able to receive things from the world. I think my problem was the opposite. I was unwilling to give.
So you're a taker.
I think I was absolutely a taker, and people would describe me as that, perhaps even today. I think people would describe me fairly as one who takes more than he ever gives. I think that would be a fair description of me in those days, and probably even to this day to some degree.
So I see a difference between taking and receiving, that when you take something, often you don't actually get to really receive it, whereas you receive it, you take the essence of it in. So are you a good receiver as well now?
Yes, I'm a very good receiver. What do you want to give me?
It's time.
Time, money, compliments, whatever you want. I deserve it all. Isn't that a terribly thing to say on a camera here? My God, talk about courage. I'm blowing my whole image. Go on.
I was recently watching Indigo and enjoyed your... was it an acting debut, or have you acted previously?
No, I've acted before.
Did you enjoy that?
Yes, I did. I enjoyed it very much.
And do you see that as something you want to do more of?
If it comes my way, it's not something I'd reach out for.
Was it fun?
But if somebody walks up to me and says, you want to do this, you want to play, I would probably say yes.
So it was a playful activity to get a
Playful,
spiritual message out.
Yeah, exactly, and it served my agenda. If I can serve my agenda and play doing it, by golly.
So you like to play?
I'm there.
What are your favourite forms of play?
Acting is one of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't do a lot of what people call playing. My playing is sitting in front of a computer and writing for 16 hours. That's play to me.
Yeah.
I enjoy being with my family, of course. I enjoy that. We'll sit down and play games, parlor games. I enjoy doing that. I enjoy going camping. A night at the theater is fun for me. A good opera, a good concert is play for me. And I guess a good book. I could sit in that chair for the next 3 hours and read a good book, and that would be real play for me. Because it's downtime. It's when I'm not necessarily outputting.
Do you get burnt out from talking or touring?
Rarely.
Like that? You still have energy when you do a lot of that?
Rarely. I rarely get burned out.
So when you come back, you recharge, but you're not from a place of burnout.
No, I'll tell you, I was burned out last year. I had gone for 8 weeks. I had gone actually 2.5 months, 10 weeks. I'd gone out on tour to Europe. And I was all over Europe, including the UK.
Yeah, I think I saw you at a conference.
And I went to about 16 or 18 cities in 10 weeks. I was burned out when that tour was over. Get me to my bed.
So there's a lesson there about your physicality as well.
Yeah, there's about 3 weeks too many. But it doesn't happen too often. I don't get burned out too much. As my friend Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, God rest her soul, used to say, it's difficult to get burned out when you're absolutely in love with everything you're doing. Very difficult.
Yeah, I find the different quality between burning out and tiredness.
It's a good tired.
Yeah.
It's like after making love.
Yeah.
No complaints. It's just a little tired.
And I was interested about writing. As a writer myself, I find that when I'm writing, it's one of the times I feel most connected to myself. Is that how you experience it as well when you're writing?
Yeah, and connected to everybody else as well.
So you see, even writing when you're doing it alone in a way as an act of service, because in a way you're writing.
I never write alone. I don't feel alone when I'm writing.
No, but I meant separate from people as opposed to separate from your own soul.
Yeah, but I mean, even the presence of other people, I always write as if I was explaining something to someone. Like there'd be somebody right across the room. So the quality of my writing would be very much the quality of what I'm saying to you right here. Very little difference.
And the projects that you've started around your work and your mission, can you tell us a bit more about those?
You know, when you get lit on fire by the possibility of truly making some kind of a difference, you begin to conceive of ways in which that could happen, I guess. Humanities Team was one of those ideas that I had about 1.5 years ago. I thought, wouldn't it be fun if we could just all get together, all of us who think alike, and move the energy that we co-create in a specific direction, create some focus, maybe even produce an outcome or two. So Humanities Team was born out of that thought. And we now have about 10,000 people around the world who belong to that organization, and we're in about 120 countries, and we're doing some things on the ground that one day might make a difference, but never to set up a scenario where it's outcome oriented. That is, whether the success or failure of the venture is based upon what actually happened or what occurs as a result of that, but really that the reward is in the journey.
when you organise what you're doing, do you have a concern that, like most things over the centuries, as soon as they get organised, they lose their heart and all that kind of stuff? Or are you confident that whatever you do is just going to help in whatever way it can?
Well, the purpose of what I do has nothing to do with outcomes. The purpose of what I do is to allow me an in-the-moment experience of who I imagine myself to be, who I choose to be. That every act is an act of self-definition. If I attach my idea of success to a particular outcome occurring, then I become very worried as to what could happen, what could fall out from that, what that's going to turn into, or whether in fact the public will grab a hold of it and change it into something else, or usurp it, or do something or another to stop it from being what I had intended for it to be. I'm a very much in-the-moment person. I mean, Ram Dass put it beautifully, I thought, in his wonderful book, Be Here Now. And so with Eckhart Tolle in his book, The Power of Now. So it's all that's happening right now. So, yeah, I guess I am starting a movement. We are calling Humanity's Team a civil rights movement for the soul, the last great civil rights movement on this planet. A civil rights movement for the soul, freeing humanity at last from the oppression of its belief in a violent, angry, and vindictive God. Gosh, imagine if we just let go of that idea. If we just free at last, Lord Almighty, free at last. Not from the oppression of humans, but from the oppression of an angry, violent, and vindictive God, a punishing God, who's going to get us in the end, for what I'm saying right here, right now, in this interview, as an example. So if we can free ourselves from that thought, we would have taken a giant step forward, made a huge quantum leap in our spiritual understanding of things, of life itself. So yes, I'm starting that movement. That's the purpose of Humanity's Team. I may even start a church someday, the Church of the New Spirituality, who knows? Just to give some people some place to congregate to.
For community.
To create community.
And is community on a personal level important for you? Do you have friends that nourish and replenish you?
Yes, community is very, very important to me on a personal level, extremely so. And I'm blessed to be surrounded by a large number of people who I call close and who I call dear and who I call friends. And they support me in 1,000 ways across 1,000,000 moments in time that allow me to feel replenished and renourished and refreshed.
So they're sources of inspiration for you?
The whole world is a source of inspiration for me, and my friends are a source of renewal, refreshment. They give me back to myself, precisely the gift that I choose to give to others.
A thought that was going through my mind earlier about there are a lot of people around spirituality and the way that we've been misled and misguided in many respects. The whole conspiracy theory idea, and my thought is, well, even if there are conspiracies, it doesn't matter. Do you have thoughts on the conspiracy theorists that we've all been kept in the dark?
No, I don't. I don't really get into all that. I don't have any thoughts about that. Sorry. That's a dead end question. I don't get into that stuff. Even if there is a conspiracy, we created it all. So let's
just undo it.
Just undo it. The only real question is, who are we and who do we choose to be? I mean, as a society, as a species, as a humanity, to say nothing about individually. Who are we and who do we next choose to be? And how do we choose to create that and to evidence ourselves in that way, to express ourselves in that way, to become what we've declared ourselves to be? It's the only question. All the other questions go away when we answer that one, even if there was a conspiracy. Couldn't hold.
But we've only ever really conspired against ourselves, haven't we? We've
Precisely.
diminished ourselves.
It says, Pogo said in the wonderful comic strip, we have met the enemy and they is us.
Yeah. So it's self-condemnation and self-liberation.
Yeah.
And there was no God ever condemning us, was there?
No, I've just written a book called What God Wants. It's the most extraordinary book of all that's come from me. I'm very, very excited about it. It's the latest book in the series of books that I've produced, and it might be the most controversial I've ever written. The book purports to say to the human race what it is that God wants. This comes up for me because you mentioned punishment. Does God want us to behave in certain ways, the absence of which will cause him to punish us? Is this what God wants? Does God want us to join a particular religion, not that religion, but this religion, and if we don't do it, then he's going to be mad at us? Is this what God wants? Does God want us to not have sex before marriage or after marriage? Whatever it is, to eat this food or to wear those clothes or to walk in that way or to sing that song or not sing any song at all, have no music around the house. I mean, what does God want? Does God want women to leave their houses without being covered from head to toe in a burqa? I mean, what does God want? What does God want?
So many people claim to know, don't they?
So I've written a book that definitively announces to the world at last what God wants. It's an extraordinary book, and chapter 13 is devoted entirely to that single topic, what God wants. That chapter, by the way, contains 12 blank pages. And then I invite the world to consider the possibility that what God wants is nothing at all. Now, where does that leave us with our theologies? And how do we justify how we've been behaving and treating each other? Because we've used God and God's religions as our moral justification for killing each other from the beginning of time. If suddenly we announce that that's not what God wants, where are we with that?
Do you think that's going to scare some people?
I hope it'll scare the hell out of them. I mean, I hope it'll scare the hell
the heaven into them.
right out of them.
So do you think in the process of liberating ourselves from our conditioning, sometimes we do have to go through some fear in order to release it at the other side?
I think
have to face
I don't know that we have to. Your choice of words that we sometimes have to would not be a choice of words I would make. We sometimes do. We do sometimes go through some fear, but do we have to? No.
No? So we can let them go without having to face them.
I think so.
Interesting concept.
Yeah. If the movement to God or to our grandest place of self-expression, self-realization, self-knowledge, and self-awareness, if that movement is a movement that has to use your word, take place within the context of some degree of fear, then it is not a movement toward joy and we'll never get there. There's a wonderful acronym for fear that I prefer. F-E-A-R, feeling excited and ready.
So you're full of feeling ready, are you?
Absolutely.
Every day. Beautiful. So if you were, God forbid, to die tonight, how would you like to be remembered?
Well, I've told all of my friends already what I want on my tombstone. 4 words. Now that was fun.
And is there anything you feel you've left unfinished, or would you be happy?
No, you know, I'd be amazingly happy. If I died tonight, I've come close to death, by the way, in the past several years. I've had experiences of that. And I've lied there on the gurney in the hospital room. It looked as if maybe I could be checking out here. And my thought about it was, boy, this has been a good life. Gosh, this has been fun. This has been so joyful. I guess if I had one regret is that I wish I could have been better to those who loved me. I wish I could have been better. Love deserves more from me than I've given it.
Neale, thank you so much.